mutation is the last evolutionary force that we're going to talk about. We've talked about other forces like natural selection and genetic drift reducing genetic diversity in a population relative to itself in the past. Mutation increases genetic diversity because it's the creation of new alleles. A mutation is a change in the DNA sequence, and if we change the DNA sequence, we might change the proteins that are produced by that sequence and maybe change the phenotype. So mutation yields new alleles, not just new combinations of alleles like we saw happening in meiosis. Mutation is a random evolutionary force, meaning that the fact that mutations happen and the identity of the mutation that does happen have nothing to do with fitness. Whether or not a mutation happens doesn't have anything to do with the individual's fitness. Okay. Whether the mutation is useful or harmful, of course, is a matter of natural selection, but the occurrence of the mutation itself is a random occurrence. Okay, so mutation can change allele frequencies, but it's really a slow force, especially compared to our other forces, selection, genetic drift, gene flow. Mutations are often too infrequent, which is probably for the best. Our DNA repair mechanisms are pretty efficient. So all by itself, mutation is not usually a really strong evolutionary force. It's most influential. It causes the most change in species with really short generation times, like bacteria, not because their fast reproduction causes more mutations, but so same number of mutations per generation, but because they have so many generations in a short period of time, there's the potential for mutations to play into natural selection in a more prominent way. Or, as I've already been hinting at, mutations might be influential evolutionary forces when they're combined with another mechanism like natural selection. Okay, so again, a simple one, just like gene flow. Mutations happen, they change the DNA. This can change the phenotype. The occurrence of the mutation has nothing to do with fitness, but the result of the mutation, the phenotype altered by the mutation, of course, could influence an individual's fitness, okay, influence selection. So that could be an interaction between a random force, mutation, and a non-random force, natural selection. So for this whole unit of, these are the take-home messages for mutation itself. So it's an important force because it's the ultimate source of variation. What we talked about in meiosis just resorts variation we already have, but mutation creates new variants. Without mutations, eventually evolution would stall out. Without the introduction of new genetic information, genetic combinations, evolution would stop eventually. But all by itself, mutation it's pretty inconsequential for allele frequencies from generation to generation. Okay, here's our summary of the whole thing. We've been talking about population genetics. We're studying processes that change allele and genotype frequencies. We talked about natural selection as one force that changes allele frequencies. And we said that decreases genetic variation. There it is on the right. Genetic drift also decreases genetic variation, but randomly. Other forces like mutation and gene flow increase the amount of variation in a single population compared to a time in the past. And we also talked about non-random mating, which doesn't change allele frequencies, but does change genotype frequencies, and that can then have implications related to natural selection. Okay, so we talked about all these forces, and then the other thing that we did was look at the math and ask the question, is this population in equilibrium or not? And we used our logic of how alleles are passed down and how we expect alleles to be passed down if there's no mutation, no gene flow, no natural selection, no genetic drift. If all of those things, all of those forces are not happening, how do we expect alleles to be passed down? We asked that question, and then we were then able to compare our population to our expectation and answer the question, is this population evolving? Okay, so those are the things we did with population genetics, looking at evolutionary forces and then quantifying whether or not evolution is happening. All right, so take-homes for the whole thing. We've got these 4 different evolutionary mechanisms. They have different consequences for allele frequencies. All of them violate the assumptions of Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. And these forces are the ultimate mechanisms causing biological diversity. All right, so you've got some Hardy-Weinberg practice problems posted on Course Connect. You've got the slides from all of these screencasts. You've got your assessments for the screencasts, and you have the exam study guide to help you review this material, to point out the concepts that are most important. And you also have a discussion forum on Course Connect in which you can post questions, you can answer other people's questions. I'll be checking it from time to time to answer the questions that I see. So lots of resources. You can email me if you feel like something is still missing.